This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Well, Donald Trump's chances of using as a defense in the D.C. election interference case that all he was doing was trying to get to the bottom of election interference in 2020 and in 2016 by Russia and Iran. That's all he was doing, and use that as a defense to try to undermine mens rea, or what we call criminal intent, just took a big hit because the judge there, Judge Chutkan, in a sealed and classified order, I'll explain that in a minute, rejected most of what Donald Trump was asking for. He was asking that he be able to use classified information, again, in his defense, and leak it and use it in the courtroom, in the courthouse, on the public docket to try to prove that all he was trying to do was get to the bottom of Russia or Iranian election interference in 2016 and 2020. That's why he clung to power. See, that's why he didn't transition to Joe Biden. That's why he tried to topple democracy. He was just trying to get to the bottom. He's a sleuth. He's a gumshoe. He's a detective. He's just trying to get to the bottom of it. Well, first of all, the judge said, well, I'm going to let you use some limited classified information. I'm going to require that the government turn over some what we call unredacted versions of documents, things that aren't blackened out. But my surmise, and we'll have to see eventually down the road, because everything related to classified information, as you would expect, is classified. So we have some limits, but we can piece together the jigsaw puzzle based on prior filings on the docket. And I can explain to you how the Classified Information Procedures Act, CIPA, works. Now, some people might be thinking, wasn't Donald Trump indicted for mishandling, retaining, destroying, attempting to surreptitiously keep classified information? Yes. We call that case Mar-a-Lago. And that's the case that Judge Cannon, another judge down in Florida, decided in her infinite wisdom to dismiss because she thinks the special counsel is a figment of her imagination and wasn't properly appointed. Let's leave that aside for a minute. All thinking judges, like Judge Chutkan in D.C. election case, have decided that the special prosecutor is legit as an entity. And let's move forward here. So the fundamental issue here is there any classified information at the heart of a non-classified prosecution? I mean, let's be frank. The indictment, surgical, addressing Donald Trump's bad conduct, one defendant, 4 counts, D.C. election interference, has to do with his conduct and his actions to try to weaponize the Department of Justice, interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, pressure election and elected officials, pressure Mike Pence, and use ultimately Jan 6 and try to set the whole place on fire in order to, as a last-ditch effort, to stay in power. That's sort of the summary of about 100 pages of an indictment. None of that is classified. All of that was out in the open. I mean, Donald Trump can't claim that his conversations with Mike Pence were classified, his pressure campaign on election officials, his use of the Department of Justice to try to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power and to declare fraud in the election when there isn't and there wasn't any. None of that's classified. So what's the classified document? There's only one. That's why it's not that hard to piece together from the docket, which is the electronic list of filings in a case, what just happened with Judge Chutkan in denying most of the relief that Donald Trump is seeking. He is seeking to make a circus and a lot of diversionary tactics at trial masquerading as a defense. He wants to be able to put on a show. And the show in front of a jury is going to be, I'm just doing my job. As President of the United States, I need to get to the bottom of the integrity of elections. Put aside for a minute that everything Donald Trump's ever done is actually undermined the integrity of elections. And also, while we're at it, how is he getting to the bottom of Russia collusion? I thought he's all excited and happy because Robert Mueller, the special counsel many years ago, cleared him and found no Russia collusion. Now, that's not exactly, that's a simplistic and simplified and simpleton version of what Robert Mueller found in his special counsel investigation. But Donald Trump likes to crow about it. There's no Russian collusion. I told you I didn't collude with the Russians. Now, apparently, the Russians are interfering. Now, we know the Iranians are trying to interfere with the elections. That's obvious. I've done hot takes after hot takes. We've covered it on Legal AF on the MeidasTouch network, that the Iranians are bad actors and are trying to go after Donald Trump and undermine democracy. And they're breaking into the DNC, the Democratic National Committee email servers, and they're breaking into Donald Trump's, and they broke into an advisor of Donald Trump's, and they try to spoof him, and they did what's called spear phishing with a PH, trying to get inside the servers as a Trojan horse like a worm and go pick up some information about J.D. Vance and embarrass the candidate. I get it. That's the Iranians. And there may even be an Iranian assassination plot against Donald Trump. It's just that Butler, Pennsylvania wasn't part of it. The 20-year-old wasn't, high school student, graduate, wasn't an Iranian secret agent. Put that aside for a minute. So now Donald Trump says everything you see. This is like in those movies or in reality where the guy gets arrested and he says, oh, no, I'm not committing these crimes. No, I'm undercover. No, I'm trying to catch the bad guy. So you're mistaken my conduct. It looks criminal. It looks like I really took that bribe, or I made that bribe, or I offered to murder somebody, or overthrow democracy. But that wasn't me. I'm working undercover. I'm working with the feds. Look it up. You know how many times that works? For those that aren't watching me on YouTube, exactly 0. And that's a version of Donald Trump's defense. And so he wants to basically squeeze the Department of Justice and not only embarrass them, but compromise our national security in order to try to throw enough smoke screens and smoke bombs at the jury that they acquit him, or at least they're hung jury. And he doesn't care what happens to national security. So he wants all those little pieces of paper that the government did provide him that have redactions, little black lines on them, like the Pentagon Papers. He wants to rip that black tape off and use it. And particularly, he wants classified information. He wants classified information delivered on his desk to his lawyers in order for him to try to make some sort of argument. Hey, look at me. It's time for bamboozled. Here we go. Look at me, jury. And start arguing about he was just the lead investigator working undercover to try to get to the bottom of Iranian and Russian collusion and election interference. Come on. And the judge isn't having any of it. So in order to piece this together, you got to start with the filing that Donald Trump made back in October. The judge is just now catching up with a lot of October filings because the case was on ice for like almost a year because the Supreme Court we're waiting on the immunity decision by the Supreme Court, and the judge, Chutkan, was divested of jurisdiction until, just about 2 weeks ago. Now she's catching up. She denied a series of motions to dismiss that Donald Trump filed in October, and now she's getting around. She's moving back in the October docket and making her way down. And now docket number 121, meaning it was the 121st piece of paper that was filed in the case, was President Trump's SIPA Section 5 notice and objection to unauthorized deletions of classified information. That's what it looks like. Now here's a teachable moment about SIPA. It's like a legal AF Patreon. Anything that relates to classified information that's going to be used in a courtroom, in a federal courtroom, in a case by prosecution or usually by the defense, has to comply with the Classified Information Procedures Act. We call it SIPA. This way, the jury gets what they need. The defense gets what they need to defend their case. The jury gets to see what they need to see in order to be the trier of fact, but the public doesn't get to see, and the bad guys don't get to see classified information. So there's a procedure, and even the judge doesn't get to see it. So they appoint a Classified Information Procedures Act, or SIPA, officer. It's an independent court officer that is like neutral above the two parties, and document issues go to that person first, appointed by the judge, with a recommendation to the judge. It's sort of like a magistrate that's working under the judge, but in this case, it's a SIPA officer. And they've already had this. So Donald Trump, in his filing, this one I just told you about, said on the bottom of the first page, the indictment in this case adopts classified assessments by the intelligence community and others that minimized and at times ignored efforts by foreign actors to influence and interfere with the 2020 election. President Trump, it's ex-President Trump, at best it's felon Trump, will offer classified information at trial. See, he has to put the prosecutors on notice of what he wants to use the classified information for. So here it is. He will offer classified information at trial relating to foreign influence activities that impacted the 2016 and 2020 elections. Both. Why not? We're only 8 years after 2016. Why don't we get around to it now? It was so important. So it was so important to Donald Trump that he's still investigating in 2020 what happened in 2016 on the last gasp of having been voted out of office. This was his cause célèbre. This was his cross to bear. All right. Is anybody buying this so far? All right. He continues, as well as efforts by his administration to combat those activities. There were no efforts by his administration to combat his activities. Donald Trump had a person who was the head of cybersecurity and integrity in elections. His name was Christopher Krebs. Christopher Krebs declared after the November election that year that it was the most secure election. There was no outcome determinative fraud in the election, and people should have comfort. American voters should have comfort and take solace in the fact that the outcome, and Donald Trump lost. Donald Trump hated that so much that he fired Chris Krebs in a retaliatory way between November and January before he left office. So that's a sign of some administration that's so hell-bent on getting to the bottom of cybersecurity and integrity in an election. All right. But I digress. Trump continues in this filing that is at the core of this new order by Judge Chutkan. President Trump will also present classified information relating to the biased and politicized nature of the intelligence assessments that he and others rejected during the events in question. Collectively, this evidence will undercut central theories of the prosecution and establish that President Trump acted at all times in good faith and on the belief that he was doing what he needed to do and what he'd been elected to do. Signed, Todd Blanche, Emile Beauvais Blanchelaw. This is what the judge is now responding to. So the judge basically said she is granting in part the motion to strike. Here's a procedural twist. The special counsel's office, in response to this, moved to strike it rather than respond to it and said, we don't even need your notice of what classified information you think you're going to use in the DC election interference case. Your whole notice is invalid. You're not going to hold America hostage by threatening in an extortive way to use classified information, and we're going to move to strike it. And the judge just said, yeah, I'm granting in large part, the motion to strike, and I'm denying it, meaning she's going to allow certain kind of periphery, fringe information, rip some of the black redacting tape off of some documents and give it to Donald Trump, reserving the right to make the ultimate decision before any trial in this case about what gets disclosed on the docket. She's not going to let Donald Trump blast his crazy theory and compromise American national security on the docket, I assure you. So it's step by step here, right? What's the old line about boiling a frog? You don't boil a frog, if you ever wanted to do that, all at once in a hot pot of water. You turn it up 1 degree at a time, and then suddenly he's cooked. Donald Trump is about halfway along of being cooked by Judge Chutkan. Let's just leave it at that. So that's what's going on with the SIPA classified information and the new reporting now that Judge Chutkan is effectively gutted Donald Trump's efforts to try to hold America hostage by threatening, I'm going to release classified information unless you drop my indictment. And that's basically what he's saying. And Chutkan's doing the right thing, as always, as she moves towards a early September, I think it's September 6th, hearing in her courtroom with all parties concerned to talk about how to get this DC election interference federal case back up and running, how to put the indictment through the meat grinder and sift it through the filter of the Supreme Court immunity decision, what's left that comes out the other side, and if that's sufficient to continue the prosecution, which I believe it is, against Donald Trump, and then get this case up and running for trial. Because when Donald Trump loses in November, okay, it's not like when a real president loses in November, because the person that loses in November is still president until January 20th at noon, 11:59 a.m. When Donald Trump loses to Madam President Kamala Harris, he just goes back to being a Florida retiree with a felony record. And $500 million of fraud judgments. Standard stuff if you live in Florida. Sorry, Florida law guy, not you. So that's where we're at with new reporting. And as Judge Chutkan continues to chop wood, stack it up, get this case ready for trial. Summer's over. Summer's over, everybody. I just took a long walk with the dog. I already feel that beautiful beginnings of fall and autumn in the air. I love fall and autumn. That's what we're doing here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF. What is that you say? Legal AF. Right. There's the ad above the fold, as we say. every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like to watch your podcast, and you can watch this one being recorded, join us at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on this YouTube channel for MeidasTouch. If you like to listen to your podcast, you can pick us up on every audio podcast platform by plugging in Legal AF. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.